Arthur, I'm going to begin by taking you back in time briefly. Do you remember the very first book that you read that really hooked you as a reader? And I want you to hold on to that thought, and I'm going to take you forward again. And years later, when you first read the Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone manuscript, what was it about that book that hooked you as a reader as well and made you just know you absolutely had to have it?
Yeah, you know, I have so many memories of books that I loved as a little kid. I mean, I started young. My mother was a teacher, and we read all kinds of books. And, you know, Where the Wild Things Are came out when I was a little kid, right around the same age. And you know, that is one that really stands out in my mind as making me think, wow, I just really love books. And then I kind of grew into other books like Roald Dahl and James and the Giant Peach and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And I think it was maybe those books that I connected to when I was first reading Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, actually reading that manuscript on the plane home from Bologna. And, you know, I read that manuscript and I just thought, this is wonderful. This is just like that kind of book. It's funny, but I really care about the protagonist, and it's this great, great combination of things. The humor and the emotion and the action. It was just kind of a delicious package.
I recently had the great opportunity to sit down with J.K. Rowling in her hometown of Edinburgh and speak with her. And I asked Jo this very same next question, and I actually want your take on it. I said, you know, you obviously knew that you had something great here with Harry Potter, but did you ever imagine that these books would enchant readers, young and old, in such epic proportions?
Yeah, I just never think that way as an editor or a publisher. It's a very personal, one-on-one connection that I have with books that I want to publish. And so when I'm reading something, there may be a kind of an internal monitor about how powerfully I'm responding. But what I responded to was purely as a reader, just how much I was so involved in the story and how much fun I was having during it. And it was all about my experience as a reader that made me so certain that I had to have this book, but even more so, how talented this writer was and how I really wanted to work with that writer, somebody who could be that talented and that funny and that emotional.
J.K. Rowling said from the start that this was always going to be a 7-book series. As an editor of the series, did that concern you in terms of readers staying with the series over 7 books?
I think I thought to myself, great, you know? Wow, I don't think I'll be able to get enough of this, you know? Fantastic. And also it had a natural shape. I mean, it wasn't so much that it was 7 books, but it was, we are going to take this young man through his entry into Hogwarts until he graduates. And that was a perfect, natural ending place. She wasn't coming to me and saying, you know, I've got this book and I have ideas for 25 sequels and blah, 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 blah. You know, she's had one whole story that she wanted to tell. And it made perfect sense to break it up into 7 pieces.
J.K. Rowling has always said that she knew exactly where she was going in terms of how this series would ultimately end. Did you know the ending from the start? Did she ever say this is how it's going to end? And also I want to ask you, as an editor, how did you handle keeping the continuity throughout these books, given the incredible amount of detail and minutia and plot points? And were there things along the way that you ever sort of said, Jo, I'm confused here, or I wondered if you might consider changing this? Were there ever those moments along the way?
Well, I never knew more than a reader of each book would know coming to the book. And that's very important to my function as an editor, because my function as an editor is to be the ideal reader. I'm reading carefully, and I'm going to ask questions, hopefully challenging or insightful ones that help the author decide whether she needs to clarify something or not. And I would often come up with questions that I would pose to her. I would say, I'm a little confused here. Why is Hermione acting this way? It doesn't make sense to me. And Jo would say, it's not supposed to make sense to you. You will get that explanation in book 5. This might have been a question I was asking in book 2. Or I would say, I noticed this character. I don't quite get where this character fits in. Is he necessary? And she would say, oh yes, he's necessary. And of course, I completely trusted her. So all I was doing was reacting. And there were some times when I'd have that reaction, and she'd say, oh, let me actually clarify that a little bit. But there were a lot of times when I would ask for a detail, and she'd say, not yet. And she knew exactly where she was going and when she wanted to explain certain things along the way. She had an absolute mastery of the whole story.
The series is now considered a modern-day classic. Many people say it's a rite of passage for 8- and 9-year-olds. Another question I asked Jo recently was, 20 years from now, 50 years from now, what do you most hope that children take away with them from the Harry Potter experience, from reading this series?
Well, that question gets me a little bit emotional. I think there are 2 main things that I hope a reader takes away from the whole Harry Potter. And the first is a kind of personal understanding that we all have magical, incredible abilities within us, even if it seems like in our everyday life we're not recognized for those. That's the story of Harry Potter, the boy who lived in a closet underneath the stairs, but was really the most significant wizard ever. And the other part of his story is that love, when you're really loved and when you really love somebody else, that is the greatest protection from any darkness or evil that you'll ever encounter. Because I think that's the other significant message of the book for me. And I would hope that would be what readers would take back from it 20 years later and think, that's where I really got this idea, this notion that I have, that I've carried around. And it does, when you are really, really loved by somebody, it does give you that protection over anything. And if you give that love to somebody else, you will have given that protection to somebody else. Because it's not just one way for Harry, it goes both ways.
I'm going to end today with a question from our readers. We actually went to our social media channels. We went to Facebook and Twitter, and we asked this question. Wouldn't it be amazing if you could ask Harry Potter editor Arthur A. Levine anything about the beloved books? Of course, we got a slew of responses. But Samantha Brattle asks this. Who is your favorite character in the series? I love this question. It's very simple, but I'm really curious, as we all are, to know who your favorite character is.
Well, I think, mostly it's kids who've asked me that question. And when they ask me that question, I always think of Hermione. Because I think if I were a kid at Hogwarts, I would have wanted to be best friends with Hermione. I mean, just because she's so smart and so powerful. And I loved when she came into her own during the series. That was one of my favorite aspects of it. But now I might also say McGonagall, because I think she has that incredibly cool power as an animagus, and she can transform herself into something else, transfigure things and transform herself. And that's just wicked cool. But she also has this very interesting aspect to her personality in that she's often brimming with emotion. She's often just at that point of anger or, great expression of affection. And she always seems to be holding it back. And you want to know, I want to know why, you know. What's the mystery of Minerva McGonagall? How did she get to be the way she is? And I find that fascinating.